Good morning and good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast, everyone, and welcome to the Q1 and Q2 2023 Report on Market Issues and Performance call. As a reminder, as most public calls at the ISO, this call is being recorded. That recording will be made available to you on the CAISO website for your convenience. Please do not transcribe or otherwise quote from the recording without first seeking the CAISO's permission and letting us know. Thank you. On that note, it is my great pleasure today to present the Q1 and Q2 market issues and performance report content, some of the content that we were able to report on. I also would like to take this opportunity to really highlight some of the other special reports and presentations that the Department of Market Monitoring has published recently. That is quite a lot of material to try to fit into an hour, and I apologize for the brevity. If you have a question, please do raise your hand to get in the queue. You may also use the chat if you do have a question and are unmuted by the producer. Please remember to mute on your phone rather than remuting yourself on the WebEx so that you're not re-entered in queue. We really do welcome questions and discussion as we go through the material. Please also, given the short hour today, feel free to contact us offline. That one way to do that is through email. There's a dmm@CAISO.com, which we monitor, and we're always happy to take questions and feedback on the reports. Finally, as always, it's an honor to present a lot of the very hard and very careful analysis that the hardworking Department of Market Monitoring does. The content is almost all created by other people, and the mistakes in this presentation are mine. So with that, I will get started. Q1 and Q2 covers January through June of 2023. Taking you back in time to that time, we started the year with very, very high gas prices. Those gas prices, natural gas prices, have come down and across the system, and with them we do have lower wholesale electric prices. We welcome the CAISO WEIM market welcomed 3 new participants in 2023 as well, and we'll talk about some of the impact of that. High uplift cost continues, and that includes both bid cost recovery, make-whole payments, both in the CAISO and in WEIM, and also real-time offset costs. Nodal flexible ramping product, which was implemented in February, and with that February implementation of the Mosaic quantile regression for net load uncertainty. And finally, a change in practice in CAISO imbalance conformance. Just to take you back here for a second, I added links on the title page to both the first quarter report, second quarter report, a special report out on the Mosaic quantile regression, a third report out on that I'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation today on real-time load settlement and the cost shift that is occurring because of the CAISO settlement design, and finally a paper that we had published on an implementation issue with that nodal flexible ramping product. And those specific links are on there, as well as a link to our our website where all of this material is included. These slides themselves will be posted either later today or first thing on Monday. Okay. With that, natural gas prices have tremendous influence on all of the market results, so I'll start with those. As you can see from the chart, the high prices that we saw in December and January, and in red is SoCal Citygate, yellow is PG&E Citygate, so both of the major California hubs, as well as in the light blue, which is Sumas in the Northwest. Those very high prices have come down in May and June. I included a couple links at the bottom here to non-VMM material that you may find of interest. The first is a link to the CPUC's docket on gas electric coordination, really looking into the price spike that occurred in the winter of 2022-23. I'd also highlight a public report out from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which does include a summary of some of the monitoring metrics that they have and some of the results of their monitoring of the natural gas market in December and January. So both well worth your review if you are interested. As those natural gas prices move, so do the electricity prices. Q1, our average prices were almost $100, $97. In the day ahead, 93 for the 15-minute, and lower 87 in the 5-minute market. Q2, much lower prices. We still do see a persistent gap between the 5-minute particularly and the day ahead and 15-minute, with lower 15-minute prices on average than day ahead, which would tend to highlight the profitability of virtual supply. This is one of my favorite charts. The axes on this chart are set for an efficient heat rate of a natural gas unit, about 10,000 MSBTU. The dashed black line here shows the SoCal Citygate gas price, and the blue line, yellow line, and green line show our average monthly load-weighted prices for the CAISO DLABs. As you can see, there's a fairly tight correlation. There are months, and I'll highlight here August and September of 2022, when high electricity demand does raise prices above the price that you would predict based on the gas price alone. There are other months, and here December and January, but March, April as well, where electricity prices are low relative to the gas price that we see in the market. One of the factors that also had a major impact in Q1 and Q2 was a very high rate of renewable generation production, particularly hydro. The weather pattern that prevailed coming into 2023 is one that resulted in relatively high rainfall and snowfall in the CAISO BA, less rainfall less precipitation in the Northwest, which you'll see in a lot of the transfer charts coming up. So a relative shift of that hydro generation capability from the Northwest into the CAISO. This chart shows the frequency of low prices by month. I'd highlight this because that tends to be the story for a lot of the intervals in Q1 and Q2. During these quarters, we tend to have the highest levels of run-of-river hydro, and in addition to the solar, low-priced solar and wind resources which are available, it tends to lead to a higher frequency of low-priced, and in this case, negative intervals. One thing we like to point out is that most of these negative prices are economic. These are set between 0 and negative 50, typically much closer to 0 than negative 50. So this is the result of economic participation by these resources in the market, often reflecting an opportunity cost of not generating with that negative bid. We see a very low frequency of negative prices at all close to the negative bid floor. I have, given that we're presenting both quarterly reports, I've tried to present both charts when possible. On the left-hand panel of this chart is the average price with the average net load in the dashed red for Q1 2023. On the right is the same chart for Q2. It's interesting to look at the comparison. So the first obvious thing that you see is that the prices were lower in Q2 across the board. The second is that there's a consistent gap between the day-ahead and 15-minute prices in the peak net load hours, so hours ending 19 and 20, and the 5-minute price. Historically, that's been due in large part to consistent imbalance conformance for the CAISO BA, which peaks in these hours. So that's additional demand being added to the CAISO BA in hours ending 19 and 20. That is in the hour ahead and the 15-minute market and not in the 5-minute market. One of the things I hope to have time to highlight today is a real change in practice that occurred towards the middle of Q2. In this period, the ISO worked with operations to reduce imbalance conformance. It's the first time in many years that our quarterly metrics show a reduction in imbalance conformance. Really a major change. When you see higher day-ahead prices than 15-minute prices, especially in quarters like these where we had relatively little congestion, one of the things that you would expect to see is quite a bit of profitable virtual supply. Virtual supply financially is buying in the day-ahead market and then selling at that average 15-minute price. Convergence bidding net profits, however, were fairly low, about 10 million in Q1 and 17.5 million in Q2. And that is due in part to bid cost recovery charges, which are partially, in part, allocated to virtual supply, net virtual supply positions. There was a month in January of 2023 when the total bid cost recovery charges were so significant that settlement as a whole of virtual demand and supply in the market for that month was negative. That's a very significant change. Just to highlight the Q3 results, which we hope to publish soon, the August, September, and October bid cost recovery charges are also very significant. That has to do with an increased RUC cost. That RUC cost was high in January, in part because of the same natural gas prices, which raised all costs in the CAISO market. The cost increase in August, September, and October, and going through November in December now, is associated with an increase in RUC demand rather than high natural gas prices. We hope to cover that in a public board memo, which should be posted in the next few weeks. I'll stop here quickly for questions. I see Chris Devon has a hand raised. If you would introduce yourself and your affiliation as you ask your question, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, hi, this is Chris Devon with TerraGen. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hi, Amelia. Thanks for the opportunity. Just a quick question on the load conformance. Did that pattern continue in Q3? I know you haven't done the Q3 report yet, but has that pattern been able to continue? I know that there was a concerted effort to try to do some testing of lower load conformance. Did that really continue at all? Do you have any observations on that yet that you can share?
Yeah. I'll share two things on that. The first is that there have been two very good presentations on this by the ISO, both in the MPPF. Unfortunately, the MPPF time slot, which I think is about 5 hours, is it 5 or 6 hours, is not long enough. So they don't always get to discuss them on the call, but the posted slides are extensive and provide a lot of insight. The short answer is yes, this reduction did continue into Q2 until the end of July. On July 20th, the CAISO had to declare an EEA1, and on the 25th and 26th was an EEA watch. Following those conditions, there was a shift back to the use of larger imbalance conformance to procure, essentially to procure ramping capacity going into the real-time market.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that was my understanding. I just was curious as to potentially if this might, lead to future continued efforts to try to, reduce that amount of load conformance. But I'll take a look at that MPPF deck as well. So thanks for the info.
Thanks for the question. That concerted effort to reduce the use of imbalance conformance also was applied to the operator adjustments which occur in the residual unit commitment RUC process. At the time, there was a decision to not use operator adjustments in RUC at all, should the peak load be something less than, I believe, 32 gigawatts. That practice has also changed following the July events.
Yeah. Do you have any info on if there was any plan to try to reinstate that practice again to continue that testing at all now? Or we're just kind of seeing the lower loads as we move into the fall winter period.
I do think the ISO is considering. I do think the ISO is taking that under consideration. Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't have a slide deck or something, a report I can point you to, but I do know they are taking the costs associated with those kind of adjustments into account.
Very good. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Okay. Moving on, these are again some of my favorite charts. One of the things we look at is the change in generation in the CAISO BA between in this case Q1 2022 and Q1 2023. The black line shows the net difference, and you can see in most hours that net change was fairly small. What did happen fairly obviously is one, a reduction in solar, which you can see in the yellow there at the bottom, and I need to fix the title on my slide here. I was working too fast last night. And the net imports, which also were lower. Those net imports, which were lower, were generally replaced by natural gas, shown in the light blue in Q1, and hydro. You can see that impact of the weather change in the reduction in solar and in the increased hydro both, as well as some increased wind generation coming in Q1. The light blue at the top and the other really highlight, which is sort of the same shade as hybrid, really highlight some of the new generation that's been added to the CAISO fleet. Very large penetration of battery resources, and we're seeing those as well.
Amelia, we do have a hand raised in the chat that went up just as you were about to change that slide.
Sure.
Hi, this is John Dietz from Southern California Edison. I wanted to ask about the load conformance again. You said that there was a concerted effort to lower the load conformance. Do we know whether or not the flexible ramping refinements played a part in the load conformance decreasing? I know there was an enhancement that was made that for FRP to go to a nodal procurement of it. So do you have any insight on whether or not that helped with load conformance, decreasing load conformance?
That's often been the argument, and that is one of the reasons that the ISOs put so much effort into in improving the flexible ramping product. I don't think that was the primary driver for the change. It is one of the factors that should have made it easier for the ISO to reduce that imbalance conformance, but it's not the primary change. There was an improvement in a set of tools that allows operators to forecast for themselves the amount of dispatchable generation. That is something that is actually documented in the ISO's MPPF slides. But that kind of tool improvement behind the scenes is really what allows operators, who are the operations, which is the team that is really making these decisions, to do so, to really be assured that they can lower that imbalance conformance without having a negative impact on reliability.
Got it. So
yeah, the flexible ramping product I'll also mention, it's a very short lookout period. It's solving for uncertainty between an advisory 15-minute and a 5-minute, whereas the kind of hour ahead imbalance conformance is really looking 2, 3, 4 hours ahead. So they're on different time frames.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Look at the same chart for Q2, and it's a really different story. And that's part of why I wanted to include both charts. When we look at Q2, what we see is, especially in the net load peak hours, CAISO BA generation declined. What we're seeing is a decline in both net imports and in natural gas generation. That natural gas generation was in part replaced with hydro in the dark blue, as well as hybrid and some battery in the light blue. Taking a closer look at the bilateral markets, this again is consistent with the availability of hydro generation in the Northwest and in CAISO, but it's a pattern that we've been seeing fairly consistently, as well as with the gas prices. We have in peak electricity demand periods higher prices at both Mid-Columbia in the Q1, Q2, and in some instances back in 2022 in the Southwest at Palo Verde in yellow. The two major hubs in CAISO DLAP average prices for the peak package hours are highlighted in dark gray and light gray dashed lines there. You can see for the most part lower than Mid-C. That would be consistent with the next results I'm about to show you, which show that in these quarterly comparisons of hourly average imports and exports, in imports above the x-axis, exports below, the net interchange before WEIM, so the difference between the dark yellow above and the light yellow below, is shown in the dotted line, and the net interchange after WEIM is shown in the dark gray. And you can see that in Q1 and Q2, there is a reduction in imports, as well as a slight increase in exports that leads to the lower levels of net imports that we see across every hour. We can also see in these charts just the tremendous amount of export coming out of the CAISO BA into the WEIM as well. Just to highlight again the report that we haven't published yet, Q3, we saw absolutely unprecedented levels of exports. And so this is definitely a chart you'll be seeing again. Just to get to the WEIM, the price results that we saw in WEIM in these two quarters are different than the price results that we have been reporting on average going back for the last 3-4 years. There tends to be price separation between the Northwest and the rest of the system. That did occur in Q1 and Q2, but it had a different price impact, and I will point that out as we move through some of the pricing results. We also do tend to see higher prices in the California areas due to the California greenhouse gas. In this period, there was also introduced a greenhouse gas program in Washington State. That market design does not include a WEIM price impact, and so we don't see a similar effect for the Washington State WEIM areas. This is one of the new charts and metrics. I think all told, it's 400 or 500 pages of highly technical material that I have links to on the front, and I wanted to highlight some of the things I think are different and really useful if you want to take a look. This chart summarizes the average 15-minute transfer limits into and out of each region. At a high level, if you look at the out-of-region import limit and out-of-region export limit in the final two columns, you can see that there's quite a bit of transfer capability into and out of California, quite a bit of transfer capability into and out of the desert Southwest, much less into the mountain Northwest, and even less into the Pacific Northwest. We're including here the 3 new areas which joined El Paso Electric, WAPA Desert Southwest, and Avangrid, only for the periods for which they were in the market. So I think this is a really good, these limits are fairly consistent in the market, so this is a fairly good filter through which to interpret the rest of the market results from WEM, which you'll see. When we look at average prices, and this is looking at the average price in Q1 for the 15-minute market in every WEI and BA. And it's doing so by the price component. The light blue is the system marginal energy price that applies in every BA, and that is to which we've added a GHG component in light green, so that lowers prices outside of California. A yellow component for the impact of congestion within the CAISO, black transmission losses, red congestion on WEIM transfer limits, and in blue, we're calling out congestion within WEI BA, a non-CAISO WEI BA. Finally added up into the total locational marginal price, which is shown there in the black line, light blue, dark blue. I wanted to highlight one particularly notable congestion impact here on PAC East. That congestion, internal congestion, happens to be on a set of constraints that are separating a generation pocket from the rest of the system, and it's an area into which there was a lot of unscheduled flow coming out actually of the SPP. So very big market impact from unscheduled flow that ended up having a fairly substantial impact on PacifiCorp's prices. This is the same chart for Q2. First thing to note is the order has changed. We rank order these by price. Very typically, we have the California BAs tend to be the highest price BAs due to the greenhouse gas effect. This is Q1. That changed systematically in Q2. The highest price BA is now at BC Hydro, and I will show you how that transfer congestion is impacting their prices. This occurred beginning in the Q2 and has been consistent. I will go ahead and get right to that and then go back to the last two slides. This chart is one of quite a few that we provide in an appendix to each of our Q1 and Q2 reports. Those include both a 15-minute average price decomposition chart like this and a 5-minute average price decomposition, as well as average transfers into and out of each BA. And that is available for every BA participating in the WEIM. This happens to be the one for PowerX for BC Hydro, and what I'll highlight here is that the transfer constraint congestion that is raising prices is occurring in the middle of the day. That transfer constraint congestion is an import constraint, and that is separating this particular BA from the rest of the system. The rest of the system has lower priced energy, but because of the relatively tight transfer constraints into the area, that lower priced energy is not able to flow into the area and lower the price. I see a question.
Thank you, Jessica Zano, Puget Sound Energy. It's actually on my question is on the last slide. So if you want to wait until you're done with this slide, or yeah, thank you. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the PACE issue and the USF coming from SPP, like over what period that occurred, and if you have any other factors that you can talk about.
What I can share about the PacifiCorp East issue is that There was some public discussion about it in the SPP Market Monitors quarterly report. So if you're interested in it, I would pick that up for this period. We haven't seen it obviously continuing to impact market results as much following the once we got into Q2 and Q3. It has stated.
Great, thank you very much.
Sure. Just to talk a little bit about the transfers that we do see in the optimized WEIM transfers that we do see. This is WEIM 15-minute exports. The chart on the left is for midday hours, and the chart on the right is for peak, net load peak hours. Again, what's happening in the middle of the day is that a lot of exports are coming out of particularly the CAISO BA and flowing into the Southwest, into the as well as into the Northwest, and a substantial amount of into actually BC Hydro. In the net load peak hours, that flow tends to reverse, with the exception again of that export into BC Hydro, which does continue out of CAISO in the net load peak hours. Most of the exports from coming into CAISO from the rest of the WEM are coming in from the desert Southwest during this period. This chart also, yes.
Oh, pardon me. I apologize. We do have a hand raised that had slipped in as well when you were switching slides before. That might be related to something earlier.
Edison, can you go back to the slide showing the prices decomposition for BC Hydro? Yeah. In the middle of the day when they're showing that congestion, is that triggering the market power mitigation in there? And does it trigger them their prices being set at the, or using the bid cost or their bid price? Yeah.
Yes, when a BA is separated by import congestion from the lower priced rest of the system, that does trigger market power mitigation. In this case, there is an available default energy bid option called the HydroDev, which is based on the opportunity cost, is meant to capture the opportunity cost for entities like BC Hydro that do have reservoir capability of that hydro in reservoir storage. So yes, market power mitigation is triggered. However, we don't see an impact of that market power mitigation. It's very few intervals in which we would see that market power mitigation actually lowering a bid.
Okay, and then the other question.
That is because of the high dB.
Okay, then another question is just, you've said before, and I know the results have shown in the past, that the Northwest, which would include BC Hydro, is, price separates from the rest of the EIM, typically with a lower price. How do those BC Hydro prices compare to the other prices in that Northwest area that typically separates off?
So the first answer to that is actually back on this slide. You can see that their prices, even on average for the whole quarter, are higher. There are prices in some of the other Northwest BAs as well. This is a unusual ordering, and that has to do with the separation of that entire Northwestern area in these very typically low price hours when they do have a higher price. This chart is also a little different than the ones that we've published before, and we're separating out intervals in which there is transfer congestion by the direction. And I think this helps a lot. So big kudos to the analysts who did this. The congestion from the area going out is going to lead to lower prices. So that's when you would be exporting more absent the congestion out. Transfer congestion in, obviously raising prices. There's cheaper power outside that can't get in. Here you can see the highest percentages in every category, 15-minute and 5-minute, are for that PowerX BC Hydro balancing area. We see 16% of intervals where they're congested in, which is not the highest percentage. We see higher levels of that export constraint for the rest of the Northwest. But what we did see in this period is really just extraordinarily frequent congestion into both BC Hydro and the rest of the Northwest. So those are hovering around 20% in the rest of the Northwest and 50% of intervals for BC Hydro. The raised prices in those intervals by about $20.
Okay, and I assume that that's related to what was shown on one of the other. When you look at the typical capacity to interconnect with, I guess it's the CAISO, where they show significant. I think like with the average one, it was showing that there was, yeah, this is it, 560 megawatts of capacity into, or is that the import limits, and then 0 on the export?
That's right. So
yeah, okay.
0 from PowerX, but from the region as a whole.
Right.
And it's those regional effects that we see really moving the Northwest as a whole. For PowerX and BC Hydro in particular, they often have BA-specific limits that bind.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure. In the interest of time, I'm going to speed up a little bit. We do have, and thanks to our very, very kind and generous AT&T operator today, we do have a little extra time at the end, so I can go a little bit long today. I would encourage everybody, please do pick up a copy of the reports, and please do ask any questions you have over email. And again, a good contact is DMM at CAISO. As mentioned by one of the earlier callers, one of the big market changes that was implemented over this period was nodal flexible ramping product, nodal procurement of flexible ramping product, really intended to reduce some of the procurement from flexible ramping that was stranded by either congestion or by sort of resource-specific constraints. I have we have a lot of good metrics in the report. I'm only going to highlight one. The ISOs also covered the nodal implementation fairly thoroughly in the NPPF slides. One of the things that they have highlighted is that there was a phased introduction of transmission constraints by type. And that has, we are still at this point in time not implementing all of the transmission constraints in the flexible ramping product run, but we are implementing most. The second thing I'll note here, and I've got a slide for this, but it's one of the papers, is that there was an issue with the demand curve implementation. We published a paper explaining that, and the ISO has resolved that issue as of October. And finally, as part of the implementation, there was a change in the way the ISO estimates net load uncertainty. We published a paper on that about a week ago, and that was also a subject of the discussion at the MSC meeting on Monday. I will go over our recommendations there. In short, though, uncertainty over load and the future availability of resources to meet that load contributes to operators needing to enter systematic and large imbalance conformance adjustments. So to get to double down on some of the answers to questions I've already given, yes, we've seen a return to higher levels of imbalance conformance. And no, the flexible ramping product deployment by itself was not enough to reduce the need to use that high level of imbalance conformance. This is one of our new charts. It just shows the differences in where the flexible ramping product capacity for the PASS group, which is now the group of entities that are passing the resource efficiency evaluation, where that flexible ramping product is coming from. Before the nodal flex ramp was deployed, there was a interim system in which there were BA-specific requirements under some conditions. That went away with the nodal flexible ramping product. That had been requiring CAISO to procure most of the flexible ramping product within CAISO. And most of the market changes we see from the deployment, I think, are from the elimination of that BA-specific set of requirements. So what do we see? We see a reduction in the CAISO, particularly for the upward direction, less so for the down, and an increase for the most part in Pacific Northwest. Just to go back to explain something you may see in some of the market results that was perplexing to me, and so I'll offer this explanation to you. In an interval in which the CAISO is exporting to an area in the Pacific Northwest, that area can provide flexible ramping to the California ISO without being affected by any of the transfer congestion into that area, just by the potential reduction in an export. So even in cases like we see through much of this period where there's actually exports into the northwest, you can see that northwestern region providing flexible ramping product to the system. That is because of the potential reduction to those exports. This chart, I will go super fast, is an explanation of the issue that we saw with the flexible ramping product demand curve. In short, the effect of this issue was that in intervals where the demand was relaxed, where the requirement was relaxed, the price was lower than it should have been. So this is a lower demand curve than should have been present. The impact is fairly small because of the very low frequency of non-zero prices. So the ISO did fix this. And if you are interested, I think it's a nice technical explanation for demand curve derivation. I'll go a little bit faster here. The quantile mosaic regression of net load uncertainty. In short, we duplicated the ISO model. We were able to re-estimate that The results in the paper, for the most part, cover 15-minute net load uncertainty for the pass group. So the group of BAs that pass the RC, typically all of them, or all of them minus one or two. What we found in doing that is that the Mosaic quantile regression model has limited predictive capability. Results are very close in most cases to the histogram. One of the issues is a problem with limited sample size. Another has to do with some technical problems in the specification, which we do explain at length in the paper and do encourage the ISO to resolve. I'll move on to my next slide here. We do recommend that the ISO develop net load uncertainty models that are customized for the net load uncertainty that they're forecasting. There are, right now, the net load uncertainty is used in the flexible ramping product, used for one of the tests in the resource sufficiency evaluation for WEIM. It is also right now being used for operator adjustments in RUC, which is part of the reason we're seeing such high levels of operator adjustment in RUC on a routine basis. That is in the MPPF, left MPPF slide. Again, the other use of this is proposed for the future IRU, IRD, imbalance reserves up and down in the potential DAME and EDAM market. We really do think that these are not necessarily the same distribution, and we have a lot of great stats on that in the paper. We're asking the ISO to review other options, and we're doing so ourselves. We're looking forward to publishing a paper that compares some of those options. We're asking also that the ISO consider reverting to a simpler approach, whether the histogram or another simple approach for applications in which entities need to be able to replicate the forecast. A particular case, and this is both for the EDAM resource sufficiency evaluation as well as for the current resource sufficiency evaluation, BAs are needing to meet a requirement that includes a net load uncertainty and procure capacity to meet that in advance. It seems a feature would be to allow them to do that by having a simpler model than the Mosaic quantile uncertainty. Yeah, and that's our final recommendation is developing something much simpler for market participants themselves to use. This chart highlights the use of in the quantile regression, the very high reliance on a very small number of the observations within the sample size. Imbalance conformance. These are the values that decreased, which was a very, very big change. In the Q2, you can see in the box whisker chart that we even had some net load hours with zero imbalance conformance, and that was a very, very big change in practice. That change in practice did end in July with the EEA events. Here too, the red shows the operator adjustments in RUC. This is the determinants of the residual unit commitment demand. You can see those increasing over the middle of 2022 in that period of high demand in 2022, but really coming down as we enter the end of the Q2 period. Those again are back up. Offset costs. our offset costs have been historically high. 2020 was 177 million from memory. 2021 was 176. Those were all-time high offset costs. 2022 was 408. For the first half of Q1, we're already at 162 million, most of which is congestion offset. We have a lot of reports that explain where this cost comes from. I'm happy to point you in that direction. A new report we started looking into because of the energy offset cost. That energy offset cost is shown here in blue. For 2022, and I'll say, 2022, there was 121 million energy offset cost. We were able to recalculate settlement for real-time load on an incremental basis and compare that settlement to the current ISO settlement design, including offset costs. When we did so, what we found is that there was a difference between what load every particular load serving entity would be paying under the current design and what they would pay if they paid according to the same incremental payment structure that is applied to generation and exports. So paying for the difference between the IFM and the 15-minute at the 15-minute price and paying for the difference between the 5-minute with a meter and the 15-minute at a 5-minute price. When we did that, we saw about in the neighborhood of about $20 million shift between market participants. Then a very thoughtful paper, we've recommended that the ISO consider changing their real-time load settlement practices. Ancillary service costs, generally fairly low typically in Q1 and Q2. There's been a very big shift to the lower cost reserve. Just to point out here, until February, you'll always see spin and non-spin operating reserves at the same 50-50, at the same level. There was a change in NERC requirements that allowed the CAISO to procure more operating reserves as non-spin. The non-spin does tend to be lower price, and that is what we see in the overall cost. More procurement of non-spin and an overall lower cost. We do tend to see fairly high costs for regulation down. Those regulation down prices are shown here in blue. The requirements do tend to be higher in these low net load periods, such as the Q1 and Q2. So that is also fairly typical. Congestion, I'm mindful of the time here. Congestion, I'm talking very fast. Congestion, fairly low in a typically south to north direction. Congestion revenue rates, a lot of really exciting work happening on this right now. This was discussed at the MSC meeting on Wednesday, and DMM is really looking forward to publishing some additional material here and looking at the ISO's opening up this for further consideration. Overall, about $32 million in losses over the Q1 and Q2 to transmission rights owners. And yeah. One more slide. I'll just end here with big cost recovery payments. These have been going up about $84 million in the Q1 and $32 million in Q2 for CAISO. That's missing on the slide there, and $13 million in Q1 and $4 million in Q2 for WEIM. Going into the middle of the year. The high big cost recovery cost in December, January is associated with the high gas price. And I will stop there for questions. I can definitely stay on for another 10 to 15 minutes.
We have one hand raised in the chat.
Hi, this is Robert Fisher with NV Energy. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Thank you for this. I have one question in regards to the FlexRamp product, specifically the deliverability and with the new nodal methodology. If there has been an increase in the deliverability, I'm seeing through your slides that there's an increased procurement in the Pacific Northwest, but as you did mention, there are limited transfer amounts that are in existence in that area. So I was curious if what your thoughts are in regards to deliverability and being trapped possibly in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'll say the case we're seeing frequently, because I had the same question, is one in which there are exports into the Northwest, and the Northwest is providing flexible ramping product to the rest of the system. That available transfer is coming from the possible curtailment of the export.
My curiosity is more in regards to net load or net ramp timeframes where there are imports. As you've shown, there are imports into California. If the FlexRamp product is taking deliverability into consideration in those cases, because if those at those instances the prices or congestion in the Pacific Northwest may make it may incentivize the procurement of FlexRamp in that area, but it could not be deliverable to California or to the southern regions at those timeframes.
Yeah, thank you. Just looking at even at the averages, what's interesting in this quarter particularly, and actually continues to some degree into Q3, given the relative hydro conditions, is if you look at regionally as a net, the CAISO is not importing from the Northwest, even in net load peak hours. They're net exporting to the Northwest. There's an export from CAISO to BC Hydro, which is bigger on average than the fairly small, it's shown in the light blue here, export that goes into PacWest, import from PacWest, and the fairly small import from Portland General. But otherwise, the Northwest as a whole in those net load peak hours is actually importing rather than from CAISO rather than exporting to CAISO.
Interesting. Thank you for the question.
Yeah.
Or for answering.
Sure. And that's actually true, for the rest of the system as a whole. So the Northwest as a whole is importing in this quarter in those peak hours, just barely. It's not as true as in the solar hours, but. Thank you so much.
Hand raised. Oh, sorry, Amelia.
Go
Kyle,
for it.
Your question once the event producer unmutes you.
With Cal Advocates. Thanks as always for these great visualizations. Can we go to slide 32 real quick?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just curious, what happened in March where you see the sudden divergence between the spin and non-spin bars?
I will. Yeah, I'll say that again because it really is a dramatic change. There was a change in NERC requirements for operating reserves that allowed for a non-50-50 split between spin and non-spin. And it did allow the CAISO at their discretion to procure more operating reserves from lower priced non-spin resources. That's where you see those red bars increasing.
All right, and is there any change then in the kind of average prices for those products?
Overall, we see that the non-spin is still the lowest price resource, even with the increased demand for it. But that overall the costs are down because of the ability to substitute that slightly less fast to react operating reserve.
Excellent. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much.
Sure. Is there another question?
Yes, there is. Jeff, go ahead with your question.
Oh, this is Jeff CWR. Can you forward to the slide 36? Last one. Oh, yes, for vehicle recovery. So you show this actual payment 84 million in first quarter. How about this number, 32 million and 30 million? So can you give me a little explain for these numbers?
The 84 million, I just missed one thing on the title of the slide. 84 million in Q1 for CAISO, bid cost recovery, 32 million in Q2. So that's the Q1 is the sum of the blue, red, and green for CAISO. In January, February, March, Q2, April, May, and June, lower. The same for the WEIM, which is shown here in yellow, 13 million in Q1, January, February, and March, and 4 million in April, May, and June.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Not hearing any other questions. I'll thank you all for your time and attention today on a Friday. If you do have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to the department. The general department address is easy to remember as dmm@caiso.com, or feel free to reach out to any of us directly. Really want to offer that there's a wealth of material available on our website. So if you do have a question, please do send it our way, and I'm happy to point you to some of the work that we've published online. Thanks everybody.